Welcome back to another episode of the Myrta Precision Health podcast. My name is Myrta and I'm a functional medicine and precision health practitioner based out of London. Now today I want to talk a little more about longevity and health optimization, but together with testing, so you can actually see whether you're doing the right things or whether you need to tweak and optimize certain things more, whether you need to emphasize certain things, or whether you're actually doing things all right and you don't have to worry so much about it. Because there's obviously a lot of talk about health optimization, longevity, which is wonderful. There are lots of wonderful supplements and tools and tricks out there. But oftentimes it can be overwhelming, it can be stressful, and also you might not really need some of it. Some of it might be very beneficial for you, but there are certain things you can test so you know what's right for you. Before I talk about the testing, I just want to talk a little bit more about longevity and health optimization, health span, and how it relates to functional medicine, what functional medicine looks at, and what a root cause approach to it is. So we used to think, and it still is being used quite a lot in the medical community, that certain diseases, they all have specific pathways, and we need to find one drug that addresses one specific thing, and then it fixes that disease. And that's wonderful in many ways. It helps to really save lives. So we're not talking about not doing that at all. We're just looking at all the new research that's come out in the past decade that shows that actually a lot of the diseases that we're worried about, a lot of the chronic diseases such as Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, strokes, heart attacks, but also things that can happen earlier in life like autoimmune diseases and cancers, they all seem to have common underlying factors. So it doesn't seem that there's just one thing for each of them, but they call them the hallmarks of aging, the hallmarks of disease. They're these different markers and these different effects in the body that can contribute to Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, cancers. So the wonderful thing about that is that if we address those, we can have a huge impact on all these different diseases, rather than having to rely on one drug for one disease that might then not work anymore, or for certain people, certain drugs don't work, or they might have side effects that then cause other issues. So the way we look at things nowadays in science is that we look at these hallmarks, these underlying factors that all contribute towards each other. They all accumulate, and if they accumulate, they eventually cause issues, any kind of chronic health issue. So we can address those underlying factors. Some of these underlying factors are inflammation and gut imbalances. That's a little easier to understand. Then there's also some fancier words like telomere attrition, where the end of our DNA becomes all frazzled and gets shortened, or where our mitochondria don't work as well anymore, the energy producing parts in the body. But what it really means in a kind of easy to understand terminology is that over time, if our cells, instead of working really nice and smoothly with each other, if they start to accumulate sludge, if they start to accumulate quote unquote rust, and when we're producing energy, the body, kind of like an engine that has not had a oil filter change for a while in the car, for example, it starts to produce all this smoke and exhaust. Same thing happens in the body if we don't clear things out properly. And if that accumulates over time, there's constant micro damage, then we run into all these issues, whether that is, like I said before, Alzheimer's, or whether that in the short run is depression and anxiety, or whether that is cardiovascular disease down the line, or in the short run, more issues like autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, eczema, all these chronic issues. Right now or down the line, they seem to have these underlying factors that we can address. Now, that's where functional medicine comes into play and has such a wonderful, powerful role, because we look at the underlying triggers for those things. So rather than, again, let's say research says there's inflammation that triggers all these things, then some companies might come and find drugs to suppress inflammation, which is great. But what if we could look at what are the underlying triggers to that inflammation? Because often the drugs that suppress inflammation can have issues elsewhere. So we always like to look at, okay, where is this actually coming from and how can we support those systems without causing issues anywhere else? Because the whole point of longevity, health span optimization is that you live longer and better. So just getting rid of one problem, if it then is at the detriment of another problem, isn't really the point. I hope you're with me there. Now, what we do with functional medicine is to look at, okay, what are the underlying triggers? As an example, inflammation, that's quite a common one, and people now have heard of in podcasts and social media. They know that inflammation is one of these underlying factors that can contribute to brain degeneration, heart degeneration, but also problems in the now, such as eczema and depression, anxiety, mood swings. Now, where is this inflammation coming from? And that's where functional medicine does some more in-depth testing. For example, it could be that there are chronic infections that are constantly making the immune system pump out inflammation to try and fight that off. There could be things like Epstein-Barr virus. It could also, oftentimes people have problems or more severe problems since COVID because it reactivated certain viruses in the body. It could also be other infections like mold exposure. That is like a fungus in the body that constantly causes issues. Other common chronic infections are things like Candida albicans. You might have heard of. It's also a type of fungus that we all or most of us have at a small amount in our gut. But if it becomes overgrown, if it becomes systemic, then it can cause a lot of issues in the whole system. And it can cause the immune system to constantly try and fight it and try and get rid of it. And the way the immune system works to try and fight off an invader is by creating inflammation. So it's actually a good thing. Inflammation is good if it's acute, short term. If we're exposed to the flu virus, for example, then the body creates inflammation, a fever, it kills it off, and then we get better. It's only a problem if it lingers, if it stays in the body and in the system, then it just slowly starts to degrade all the different tissues in the body. And that's why it's also called inflammation that leads to aging and all sorts of age-related diseases. Now, another common underlying factor for inflammation that is often overlooked is and are hidden food intolerances. I see this quite commonly in my practice. Now, if, let's say, someone comes in, they are doing everything right, they're sleeping, they're exercising, they're eating healthy foods, they're taking some magnesium supplements and vitamin D and getting sunshine, all these basics, but they're still not feeling quite all right. There often are underlying factors that are causing and contributing to these issues. And one of them that I commonly see are hidden food intolerances. Now, why is that a problem? Hidden food intolerances, if they are triggered by something called IgG antibodies, it's a similar thing to what I just explained with the chronic infections. Now, our immune system, usually if there's an invader, it creates an inflammation and then it creates memory cells called IgG antibodies so that the next time the body's exposed to that invader, it can create that inflammation really quick and get rid of it so we don't get sick along the way. Now, if for whatever reason the body has deemed a certain food as an invader, it will also create those IgG food intolerance, these IgG antibodies towards those foods. And then every time you're exposed to that food, it could be something healthy like an almond or an egg. Those are very common ones. Then every time you eat that food, the body thinks it's being attacked by an invader and it pumps out inflammation to try and kill that off. But obviously there's nothing to be killed off because it's a food, but it causes inflammation in the body. And that inflammation can linger for days. So someone might be eating a little bit of almond cake on a Sunday and still feel brain fog, fatigued, have achy joints on a Wednesday, not really knowing where this is coming from because it doesn't happen right away. It's not an allergic reaction where you straight away have a sniffly nose and you have a rash or hives, but it's more of a lingering low-grade inflammation that develops over a few hours, over a few days, and then can stay around and linger in the system for a few days. So that's quite common that I see that. Now, the important part here is, though, that let's say you run a food intolerance test and you have certain food intolerances. The important part is to temporarily remove them so your immune system can calm down. But then you need to figure out why did that happen in the first place? Why did the immune system mistakenly classify them as a problem as an invader. And that's usually coming from the gut. If there's something in the gut not quite right, let's say there are parasites or H. pylori overgrowth, or like I said before, fungal overgrowth, those are common ones, then the gut lining becomes less strong and it allows foods, take that example of the almond, to go into the bloodstream at a slightly different shape than it normally would if the gut was really nice and strong. And then the immune system doesn't recognize it and creates those food intolerances. That's also why oftentimes people come back with food intolerances to a lot of the foods they eat a lot. And then they think that's just a fluke test, but actually it's because there's a problem in the gut. So it needs to go hand in hand. So the way functional medicine looks at those hallmarks of aging and these underlying factors that can contribute to age-related decline, but also issues now, all these chronic niggly issues, is to look at the underlying factors. Now, the wonderful thing is that a lot of the strategies that we can do to optimize our body machinery to prevent those hallmarks are actually quite simple, and they are often free, they are not fancy, and there's simple things like just eating a whole foods diet, not eating processed foods because the body doesn't recognize them, having a balanced Mediterranean style diet based on vegetables and based on protein, some good fats like omega-3s that quench inflammation, not eating all the time, having periods of intermittent fasting so the body can actually clean up after itself and not allow those cells to accumulate that are aging us, causing issues. Also getting all the basics, the sleep, rest, exercise, not over-exercising, but also really importantly, not constantly being in fight or flight. That's something that people are talking about more, which is good, but it's so important. If we're constantly in fight or flight, our body cannot send the nutrients and the oxygen to our organs, to our reproductive organs, to our hormonal glands. So then we can't digest properly. Then we develop food intolerances. Then we don't produce the right hormones. So then our cycle gets out of whack. So all these different things, if we're constantly in fight or flight, our body can't do its normal stuff, cleaning up, restoring, recovering, and then eventually that degrades our system, causing issues and also long-term all these really serious health issues. So that's another really important, sounds so simple tweak, but so powerful. And some other ones like living with the circadian rhythm. So having daylight has been shown to have different signaling, sends different signaling in the body to help us be healthier, reduce our cortisol levels, reduce inflammation, but also eating with the circadian rhythm. So eating during daytime rather than at night has a huge impact on how our body can use that food, whether it makes us more inflamed, whether it makes our body produce more cholesterol. Even if it's the same amount of food, if we eat it in the middle of the night, it has a different impact. Again, also, if we, for example, eat the same meal after we've had a night of bad sleep, then our body's more inflamed the next day and utilizes it in a different way. And I just said, if we're not getting enough sleep, the body's more inflamed the next day. So that can also contribute to long-term problems, to health issues. Sleep in itself is needed so that the body can recover, restore, can get some of that. And we produce toxins all day long. And it's during the deep sleep stages, that really deep restorative sleep, where the brain shrinks a little bit and it can flush out any toxins that we've accumulated just naturally throughout the day. So it's really important that we just do those basics. And they don't sound fancy, but they are actually the most important thing. Now, if you're already doing all these things, but you're not feeling quite right, then that's where functional medicine can help with some more specialized testing. Like I said before, oftentimes people have hidden food intolerances they're not aware of. So they're trying the newest trend of eating more protein, which is wonderful. But maybe they're adding in more almonds and eggs, and they are actually intolerant to those foods. And then their body becomes more inflamed instead of it helping them. Or they're putting in lots of fiber and fermented foods, beans, legumes, because they read that that's really important for our gut microbiome and our health. But maybe that person already has an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut, and then actually putting in more fiber, more fermented foods can cause issues and make it worse for them. So if you've tried the basics and they haven't worked for you, then functional medicine can help you address or find out the underlying triggers, and you might have to tweak those things. So you might do better with slightly less fiber temporarily while you're addressing and fixing the gut. Or you might have to cut out certain healthy foods temporarily that are inflaming you until everything's back in balance. Now, another thing that functional medicine can do, and the way it works with longevity that I find very empowering, is that it also looks at, let's say you feel good, but you want to be really proactive, and you've gone to your GP or somewhere else, got a blood panel, and they say, quote unquote, everything's fine. But you might be aware of the fact that oftentimes these things are fine, but not optimal. And then all of a sudden, after 5, 10, 20, 30 years, a full-blown health condition is there. Now, the reason being is that these, let's say they look at a blood test result, a lot of these markers like cholesterol, like blood sugar balance, the reference ranges are designed and created by taking the average of a population, not optimally healthy people, but the average. So that means that you might come back with a inflammatory marker that is in the normal range, but is already for the last years constantly at the high end of the normal range, that is already contributing to issues and slowly degrading the body. And then overnight, you have a full-blown issue. Same with blood sugar markers, same with certain nutrients like ferritin, our iron storage molecule. So if you feel good, but you want to be more proactive, then the next step would be to say, okay, let me just run normal blood panels, but see that I am optimal and not running into issues just because I'm comparing myself to the average of the diabetes, obese, all these slightly unhealthy people, but actually you want to make sure that you're optimizing. And the wonderful thing there as well is that it actually helps you not overstress as well. Because what I found is that this whole health optimization, longevity thing can be a little stressful as well, and it might actually be counterproductive in a way if it stresses you out and you feel like you just need to do all these 1,000 different things to be healthy. And then the stress of that can actually be detrimental. Now, these tests I find wonderful because they can show you whether you're on the right track. And if you are, maybe that tiny little bit of cake after if you have really nice, healthy, balanced meal, then a little bit of dessert after is usually not a problem. Or maybe having that one night out a week doesn't really affect your body in a bad way, but actually helps you reduce your stress and have some fun and some playtime. And that's why these biomarker tests are so good, because it can show you where you're actually optimal and you don't have to worry so much and don't have to stress about it so much. And on the contrary, it can help you direct your attention to where maybe you have to make a few changes, where maybe your sweet tooth isn't just that tiny little bit of dessert after your meal, but it has gone out of hand and you're kind of telling yourself it's okay, but it really is an issue. So that's why these tests can be really empowering and can help you make choices and changes that don't have to be overly restrictive, but just help you target your attention where you need to make changes that are important for you. Because sometimes it can also be that you have a genetic predisposition towards something and your best friend or your partner does the same thing and they are running into an issue, but you're fine, or the other way around. And so testing is really a nice way to see what's going on for you, what's important for you, where do you need to tweak it, where can you let loose a little bit and just live a little more. Because actually also playfulness, social connectedness, meaning and purpose, those are all very important part of longevity. There's research that shows that people that have a social network are healthier longer. There's also research that shows that can help us reduce stress, and stress is one of the factors that degrades everything in the body, all of our healthy tissues. Also, meaning and purpose, very important. So sometimes having that extra tiny little piece of chocolate might not be the problem, but maybe you're isolating yourself or you're stressing about being healthy too much can be worse for you than just living a little bit. So it's all about balance. Now, I hope you found this helpful and you're taking away some action steps for the New Year's. I will be running a few workshops in the new year, in person in London, but also on Zoom worldwide. If you want to learn a little more about it and also ask questions to me, you can bring your blood work and we can look at certain things, whether they're optimal and what they might mean, what certain tweaks you can make to optimize certain pathways. Now, I look forward to hearing from you. As always, I would love to have your comments. Let me know if that was helpful, if you have any other questions, and I would love to hear from you to create more content that helps you better, be more empowered to take your health into your own hands.